So this was my first time coming to Springfield and getting the opportunity to go to the museum and Lincoln's home. You know, it was important for me. It really brought to life some of the things that I have viewed more through an academic prism, and being able to see it and feel it and touch it and be there is very meaningful to me. So.
You didn't do any of your research here?
No. So my co-author did most of the traveling research. There wasn't that much because the heart of what we used was the transcript, and it kind of went from there. The building where this trial occurred isn't there anymore. So there wasn't an enormous amount of, and you're talking about a transcript that was only found in 1989. So once we had the transcript in hand, a lot of the, some of the research actually, and this is items that David found, was we would have in the book items that Lincoln bought on certain days and during the trial. And I said to David, I said, how do you know this? How do we know what he bought? And he said, showed me the source material for, there is a pretty decent cataloging out there of every day of Lincoln's life, starting in the 1850s and beyond. And it happens that on some of the days during the trial, there is evidence and documentation about exactly what Lincoln had done and purchased. And I thought that was fascinating.
What is the name of the book now?
My book? Yeah. Lincoln's Last Trial, the murder case that propelled him to the presidency.
It was Mr. Fisher who proposed the book.
Yeah, yep.
And tell me about his fascination, your fascination with finding this transcript.
Well, he came to me, and he and I knew each other a bit, and he came to me and he said, I want to do a book about a Lincoln trial. And I said, okay. And he said, there's a transcript out there. It's the only one that exists of any case Lincoln ever argued. And it was only discovered in 1989 in the garage of the great-grandson of the defendant. And no one's really written about it. And I said to him, come on. The only transcript that exists of a Lincoln trial, and no one's really done anything on it, just become a kind of a footnote to history. And as it turns out, it was true. It was one New York Times article, there was one American Bar Association analysis of it, and apart from that, it was sort of forgotten. And it's I'm thinking about the David Herbert Donald's book, which was a terrific biography of Lincoln, had 3 pages on this story, and it got one of the critical details wrong. And I was thinking, I must be the first person ever to have recognized that, because this trial had become so forgotten to some degree. It was, so that was the genesis of how we decided to do the book, and it turns out he was exactly right, that this was the only transcript and that it was a footnote to history, and so we had a lot of fun. It was also a critical time. I mean, when you think about the fact that we're talking about, late August, early September, 1859. This is not some random trial that Lincoln did in his past, and oh, it just happens to be an interesting trial. I mean, this is the time. This is post Lincoln Douglas debates. This is the beginnings of the discussions. Hey. No, they want you to sit here.
Yeah, go ahead and sit up there.
Yeah.
Dan, can I throw out, if I might, on a different topic?
Yeah.
I could talk to you for an hour, so I'm going to let you kind of wander a little bit if you want. But, you know, let's look at the recent Kavanaugh event. And now we have what's happening with Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would have been surprised in that Kavanaugh example with friends I knew, you know, normal people, where all of a sudden they're just like throwing out the presumption of innocence, throwing out any idea that we should have evidence to back up an allegation. And I'm just wondering, I found that somewhat shocking that people were just willing to throw out kind of the Constitution. What your reaction is?
Yeah, so I think that the Kavanaugh situation is comparable to the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Fairfax situation, which is you're dealing with an isolated, in Fairfax's case, seems 2 allegations of sexual misconduct from someone's past. And I do think, though, that the public and from a political perspective, the legal standards don't apply. I mean, it's simply not the case that everyone else has to apply due process to a political leader or a Supreme Court prospective justice. That actually isn't the way our system is supposed to work, in my view. The reason that we have these proof beyond a reasonable doubt, these constitutional provisions of due process, is because the government has the power to take away someone's freedom. When the government has the power to take away someone's freedom, we have decided as a society, as a country, you better really have a lot of evidence in order to do that. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. That's not the same standard that has to be applied in a political decision that is made. So, you know, I'm not as horrified, both in the Kavanaugh case and in the Fairfax case, about the fact that these are people who are now being, you know, forced to answer. Doesn't mean that they are guilty of a crime. Doesn't even necessarily mean the allegations are true. But it means that I don't think that we necessarily, I don't think we have to, nor should we, apply the criminal justice standards to allegations of people living in a political environment.
As the public, well, what would you say about, say, members of Congress when they're considering an appointment to the Supreme Court?
I think the same thing applies. I think that you don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You can make it, look, every day in our lives we make decisions that might not be admissible in a courtroom. We live our lives based on hearsay, and yet hearsay is not admissible in a criminal trial. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And so I would say that similar sorts of evaluations have to go on in something like a Kavanaugh or a Fairfax. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean, and therefore Kavanaugh shouldn't be on the court, or therefore Fairfax should be impeached. All it means is that I think that it's misleading for people accused to say, the people who frustrate me the most are the ones who cherry pick, who say, well, you know, in this case, we got a due process, innocent until proven guilty, and then someone of their party gets accused and they apply a different standard. So I would rather simply say, I'm going to apply it to both and say, look, in neither case am I saying that the criminal justice standards should apply.
What, I'm curious, again, since we have limited time,
Yeah.
to jump around. You're an entrepreneur in new media. What are your thoughts on where media is and where it's going? And, you know, we grew up in a world of broadcasting, and now I think we're in the world of niche casting.
Yeah, it's a very fractured media environment now. and the gatekeepers don't have nearly the herd that they once had behind the gates. There are a lot of other ways to get information, and that's both a good thing and it can be a bad thing. I think it's a good thing that more people have voices, that it's not just in the hands of a few elites to decide what the public sees or doesn't see. And on the other hand, the problem is that there are no standards, basically, that exist when it comes to social media, that anyone can say anything and publish it without concern of repercussions if you're not. See, the people who suffer repercussions are the ones who are the mainstream media. They're the ones who have to actually be accountable. The people who are freelancing it, they say something, it's not true. You know what? So what? Wasn't true.
Mr. Floyd Abrams, you're another one we could talk to for a long, long time, so I feel guilty just asking you for a nugget. But with your wealth of experience and what you have seen over the course of your career, what is your assessment just in general of the current political climate? Do we worry about it more than we should, or should we be more worried than we are, generally?
We've rarely had a time in American history outside of war itself or preludes to war, such as the Civil War, in which the country was as divided, as excited about the division, and as angry at candidates, and in particular President Trump, and as supportive from his supporters, as we have now. We've lost touch with a common basis of judging truth. What is a fact? Should facts matter? Is everything a simple political judgment? You say this, I say that, and particularly with social media, where things are said with absolutely no support, and yet too many people think that because it was on the internet, that therefore it has some presumption of being accurate. So, we do have that problem. And the other one I'd mention is simply that while we've had presidents who have taken steps well beyond anything President Trump has done to the press. The Sedition Act of 1798 resulted in journalists going to jail under John Adams. President Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus more than once, and some journalists went to jail. Teddy Roosevelt tried to get Joseph Pulitzer jailed and ordered his attorney general to do so. And none of that has happened. But what has happened is that we have, for the first time in our history, a president who has set out to persuade the public that the press is simply not to be trusted, and who has made it an agenda item, not because there's a war here or there, or because they were fearful of this or that happening to the country, but an agenda item to discredit and demean and therefore limit the impact of the press. That is new, and it's very troubling.
And if you will, your foray into Lincoln Scholarship, how has that been? How have you been received? And what do you take away from it?
Look, I've been careful to stay in my lane. I don't portray myself as a great all-knowing Lincoln scholar. I think I probably do know more about this particular case, David and I do, than anyone else in the country. But apart from that, you know, look, researching this case taught me a lot about Lincoln the lawyer in particular. And, you know, before that I had been just a history aficionado, an admirer of Lincoln. But digging in the way we did to understand the context of this trial and how he came to be here provided us with a real insight into Lincoln the lawyer that was fascinating and valuable and really enhanced my appreciation for what a great trial lawyer he was. He did appellate work, he did trial work, but you know, I think that it was really the trial work where he excelled. And I think that that's some of those same qualities are what made him a great politician. His ability to talk to people, his ability to bond with people, his ability to understand what people cared about, his ability to create an emotional moment when he needed to. These are all things that make someone a great politician and a great trial lawyer.
Just a couple more minutes, guys.
Yep.
Did you need anything? You know, I'm kind of like you, and I'm only not a lawyer, but when I read his Cooper Union speech, to me I was impressed at his ability to analyze an argument and to break it down and to take it apart. Did you find that in your book in how he argued the case?
Yeah, I mean, look, remember that we're talking here about a trial, right? So we're talking about him questioning witnesses most of the time. The transcript was only witness testimony. Opening statements, closing arguments were not included in the transcript because they weren't evidence. So what we really got an insight into was, you know, Lincoln, the strategist, Lincoln, the trial lawyer. But I think that, and I'm going to talk about this tonight, is one of the things that surprised me most about Lincoln as a lawyer was there's a moment in the case where he becomes furious at the judge at losing a legal ruling that was critical in the case. And we have descriptions in there from people who were in court. They've never seen Lincoln like this. Furious, angry at the judge. And it's not a side of Lincoln that we think of that often. But it was Lincoln the advocate. Herndon said afterwards that he thought the judge caved because Lincoln badgered him so much. And you know, that's not what we typically think of as Lincoln. We think of Lincoln as more sort of, you know, the homespun, charming lawyer, you know, the strategist, etc. You know, I had never thought of Lincoln in the way that the descriptions that we have in the book of the people who were there, talking about his fury, and that was really fascinating for me.
Thank you very much.